Welcome to our new public affairs show, Morgantown Today. During this show, we'll bring you a behind-the-scenes look into the issues that matter most to you, our viewer. I'm your host, Claire O'Neill.
And I'm Elena Degenhart. Each week, we will tackle a different topic, and our guests on our show will be the decision makers who make an impact on the Morgantown community.
That's right, Elena. Morgantown Today will also address matters of public policy and interest, including topics on education, culture, and politics. This show is made possible through a partnership between the City of Morgantown and the WVU Reed College of Media.
Today, we'll be discussing police reform, an issue that's been dominating national news this year, and how it's impacting Morgantown. With the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, two African Americans who were killed by police officers, people around the country have voiced their opinions on reform in numerous ways. From protests, petitions, and letters to local governments, and many Americans are calling for change.
Since the death of George Floyd, 16 states have introduced bills on police reform, and 13 cities have plans in place to defund their police departments, including the two biggest cities in America, Los Angeles and New York City. Right now, Morgantown City Council has a special committee working on drafting an ordinance that focuses on police reform.
Joining us now in the studio to give us more information on how police reform is impacting Morgantown is Deputy Mayor and Morgantown City Council member Rachel Fetty. Thanks for joining us, Deputy Mayor Fetty.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Fetty has served as the Deputy Mayor for over a year now. She's also served as the City Council representative for the 1st Ward District for 3 years. Deputy Mayor Fetty is also a public interest attorney in Morgantown. Fetty is currently on a special committee, helping to develop an ordinance in Morgantown that would create a Citizens Police Review Board. This board would provide input to police department policies, practices, and procedures.
Deputy Mayor Fetty, thanks for joining us. Could you tell us a little more about this resolution that's being called the Affirming and Strengthening Community Policing Resolution?
Yes, the resolution is designed to affirm the City of Morgantown's intention to make sure that we are addressing the concerns of our community about safe policing and about equal protection and for folks who currently feel that they're not being protected equally. It's in response to situations that have arisen nationally. We do not have an event to look toward in the City of Morgantown or actions by the police in the City of Morgantown that would have moved us in this direction. But we felt it was important, considering the concerns that are being raised across the country, to respond to the requests of our constituents who have had marches, as well as the letters and communications from our constituents.
It's not just here in our community where residents are asking for police reform. A recent Gallup poll shows that 58% of Americans say major changes are needed to make policing better. And this past June, Morgantown City Council received over 100 letters from residents asking to defund the police. How has the City of Morgantown and the police department handled those requests?
It's been important for us to think about Morgantown's response in the context of a police force that has worked very hard to implement requested changes in the past 10 years. Our police department has done a wonderful job of making sure that many of the protections that are being requested now are already in place. When we were approached by members of the ACLU and the NAACP and others in our community for reform, and we were presented with a list that was being presented to police departments across the country, we had essentially implemented every single reform with the exception of a civilian review board. And that's a great credit to the Morgantown Police Department and to our Chief of Police, Chief Preston, who's retired, and now Chief Powell. Their commitment to making sure that they police our community in a safe and equal way is a credit, I think, to them.
Deputy Mayor Fetty, I understand that residents weren't the only ones to write letters to City Council. West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey also sent a letter to the Morgantown City Council. In that letter, Morrisey says the city does not have the legal authority to create a community review board that oversees the police department. I know you have seen the letter. What is your response as deputy mayor?
Well, I don't have the ability to speak for City Council or for the City of Morgantown as a whole. What I can say is that the City of Morgantown is, of course, taking the AG's letter very seriously, and we are certainly reviewing our proposed ordinance and the way in which we're developing the language of that ordinance, as well as the language of the resolution to ensure that we are in compliance with the law. One thing I have learned, though, as I've done more research into this issue, is that our state has many reforms that we need to undertake in order to protect the rights of everyone in our state. Currently, the hearing board process allows for the appointment of a 3-member board that will hear any complaints about a police officer or a fireman or firewoman. And that hearing board is appointed by the chief of police, the Fraternal Order of Police, and either a member of a business community or chosen by the police officers themselves. That hearing board is the only group that has the ability to implement discipline and to affirm discipline that's proposed by a chief of police. So we understand that we are not proposing or creating a board that will implement discipline or otherwise affect a police officer directly. What we are looking to do is to ensure that there's a process that's available to alleged victims of police misconduct or persons in our community who have concerns about whether our citizens are being treated equally and fairly. We want to make sure that there's a process for us to ensure that they can have their voices heard. I do not believe that the AG, I don't believe that the AG's letter insinuates that that would be a violation of the law. And I think we have a number of other concerns that we'll be bringing to the AG, but we're in regular communication with them.
Deputy Mayor, as you said, in order to make sure officers are held accountable for their actions, the City of Morgantown currently has a 3-member Police Civil Service Commission, 1 member each nominated by the Chamber of Commerce, the City of Morgantown, and the Fraternal Order of Police. According to the information on the city website, the current commission develops and administers tests for police service in the community, promotions, appointments, and even conducts hearings when charges are brought against an officer or if there is a possible reduction in rank. Deputy Mayor Fetty, how would this Citizens Police Review Board be different from the Police Civil Service Commission?
We are in the middle of the process of developing a Citizens Review Board. And so none of the details that we're discussing today are firm or are etched in stone or have yet been presented to the council. However, what the committee is generally proposing is a body of citizens that would have the opportunity to talk to the alleged witness and to interview the officer and to try to review other evidence or information that might be available about an incident of alleged misconduct or impropriety. The group would have the ability to look at the officer's actions from a citizen's point of view and to make recommendations about how the MPD could potentially change training or increase training and to offer suggestions about ways that the processes at the MPD could be improved, as well as making a recommendation about what the Citizens Review Board believes would be appropriate discipline. Now, it would be a purely advisory board. It would not have the ability to implement discipline, but we are hearing from our constituents that they would like our community members to have a larger say in how our police department is run and functioning.
Deputy Mayor, why do you think it's important to create a Citizens Police Review Board, especially now during these unrest times in our country?
I think that the events that have played out across the country that have always occurred are now being documented, and they're being documented by citizens and they're being brought to the public's attention. These incidents have always taken place. Police overreach has always taken place. That's why the actions of the police in our Constitution are so clearly restricted within the Bill of Rights. We know that state actors have a tendency or have the capacity to act in our names as citizens of our country or our state or our city, or our city, to act in our names and to overreach. And so it's very, very important that at every level of government that we respond to citizen concerns and that we make sure that we're addressing any questionable conduct and that we're addressing any concern a citizen may have about being treated equally. Because equal protection of the law, due process, and our civil liberties are at the heart of our existence as a nation and our existence as a democracy. We cannot violate the rights of our citizens or the civil liberties of our citizens and expect the kind of participation that we need to be a great country and to fulfill the promise that we live with. This is particularly important when we have some people, either nationally or at a state level, who are subtly or very clearly undermining the equal rights of minority groups in our country. We simply cannot allow that to stand. Every single person in our community is valuable. We are all entitled to the same protection under the law, and it's our job at the local level to make sure that we follow through with our promise to treat folks equally and fairly.
In 2017, West Virginia's state and local government spent almost $400 million on policing. Could you break down for us where the money was spent in Morgantown for the police department?
What I can say is that the police department's budget has increased every year up until this year. This year, there were essentially holds placed on any additional spending, but that was in response to the COVID virus. We are always working towards maintaining a police department that has adequate staffing, adequate training, adequate supplies, and the material that they need to do their work. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 virus and the pandemic has forced Morgantown, just like most municipalities, to cut back on our spending in order to ensure that we're able to fulfill our basic services. I think the majority of our funding goes to payroll and to hiring our police officers. We are a service industry, essentially. At the municipal level, we provide services, and that's where the majority of our budget goes.
Now, normally that money is spent from a city's general funds, which can include taxes like property or income tax. Who decides how that money is spent in the Morgantown Police Department?
Well, our chief of police works with his upper level staff to come up with a budget. The budget's presented to the city manager. The city manager includes it in the overall annual budget, and they work together, and then they ultimately bring the budget to us at the city council to approve or disapprove.
The city's budget being cut by over $3 million this year due to the coronavirus. Are there any future plans to defund the police department or cut their budget?
I think the campaign to defund the police, that is a national campaign, is not a campaign that's well suited to our city or our city budget. At this time, the city has no intention of defunding the police. And I want to be very clear that the campaign to defund the police is quite poorly named generally. My understanding of that request is that what's being asked for is a reallocation of funds that typically go to the police, to social services, to social workers, and to mental health professionals, and to others who can provide the emergency response services that are often being requested of the police, with the goal that someone who is well trained in working with folks who have mental health issues or who have other distressing conditions can receive assistance from a person who's very trained in that area. So one of the things that we are considering is adding a social worker to our staff, but it's not been decided whether that would be as part of the MPD or part of our administrative staff. but that is being considered right now.
Deputy Mayor, I understand there are currently 10 positions open on the Morgantown Police Department, and the city intends to not fill half of those positions. With 5 vacant positions in the police department, the city is saving little over $300,000 per year. Where is the money that the city is saving going toward?
Currently, we are facing shortfalls in our tax projections for the coming year and for the current year. Unfortunately, it is anticipated that those shortfalls will continue into the known immediate future for at least a year. We are not underspending because we have additional funds that are available to allocate to other things. We are not spending money that we do not have. The coronavirus and the impact of the pandemic is very extraordinary. It has cut back, of course, on our ability to accrue tax funds to serve the public, but it's also really cut back on the services that the public can take advantage of. So for example, one thing that's very important to us as a city is our parks and our recreational availability. Our ice rink is in dramatic need of additional resources and funds, and we are desperate to get it open. But we simply don't have the funds to accomplish all the things we want to do right now. There's no plan at this point there's no intention to cut the budget of the MPD in response to this national crisis. What we are facing is the impact of the coronavirus. At this point, what we've done in terms of cutting back on the budget is that we are encouraging folks who want to retire. We are asking some folks to give up hours voluntarily, and we are not refilling positions until we have the funds available.
Some could argue that the city would be safer if the vacancies were filled. Do you plan on filling them anytime soon? And is the Citizens Police Review Board an attempt to rebuild trust between the police and community members?
So that's a two-part question. First, I would say that we have recently agreed to refund or fill some positions. Recently, the city's gotten some CARES funds, and those funds will be used to help our city departments across the board fill positions that desperately need to be filled. At this time, I'm not sure how much of those funds will be allocated towards filling police positions. Would our community be safer if those positions were filled? I think it remains to be seen what the impact will be.
Deputy Mayor, it's obvious you are passionate about public service. In regards to spearheading the creation of a civilian oversight board for the police department, as I understand it, all city council members agree that this move affirms their commitment to human rights and the safety of community members. Can you elaborate?
I think our approval of the resolution affirms our commitment to ensuring that every member of our community is treated equally and with respect. I think it's very, very important to be clear that some of our discussion about policing in our country is not very clear or specific. Our police officers work on our behalf. They represent us. They represent us, and they are there to protect us. They are there to ensure that we have safe communities. And it's very, very important to me, and I believe to my fellow councilors, that when an officer is on the street representing the community, that they have the best interests of the community, the whole community, and everyone in the community at heart.
So what would change if the council approves the creation of a civilian oversight board for the police department? Will the current police review board stay intact?
Yes, the current police review board would stay intact. The purpose of that review board is to review the evidence and discuss the situation with the officer and to come up with a mechanism for disciplining the officer if misconduct is confirmed. The proposed civilian review board would be supplementary and would primarily focus on addressing the concerns of alleged victims or their families, as well as addressing concerns raised by members of the community who would like to see changes either in the way in which the MPD is operating or training or otherwise interacting with community members.
Deputy Mayor, in reading over the working draft ordinance for the Citizens Police Review Board, it stated that the board would consist of 9 community members appointed by City Council. What are the qualifications needed for a resident to apply for one of these positions?
Well, once again, we can't say for sure whether or not how that process would work. Currently, we're working through a process that would encourage participation by some specific interest groups, particularly the ACLU and the NAACP, but then it would also be substantially made up of citizens who are interested in ensuring that our officers and our police department carry out their duties in a way that is community oriented and supports our philosophy of community policing and the philosophy of the MPD in regards to community policing.
Police reform in America has really been under a microscope. So these positions with this new Citizens Police Review Board will also be in the spotlight. Will there be any type of orientation or training prior or during these appointments?
I am sure that we will have to train the members of the Civilian Review Board in their duties, in their responsibilities, whatever they may be, and in their obligation to the public.
What kind of power or duties will this Citizens Police Review Board have over the Morgantown City Police Department?
This group is specifically an advisory board. They will not be making decisions about any of the areas that have been mentioned. They will be making recommendations. And I think it's important to understand that this is not the goal is not to create a body that has no teeth or has no power. The goal is to create a group that can work in a cooperative manner with the police department so that we can ensure that our community receives the policing that it has received over many years, and policing that is responsive to current community concerns.
Deputy Mayor, it's obvious from what you are sharing with us today that this Citizens Police Review Board will have a great deal of responsibility. And one of their duties will be to follow up after the Morgantown Police Department's investigation of a complaint of misconduct. It is my understanding that the board would have the authority to conduct a review of the findings and provide input to the Morgantown Police Chief. I'm curious as to how the police department, including the police chief, feels about this Citizens Police Review Board. Are they on board with this idea, Deputy Mayor?
The rise of this concern on a national level has created an impression that all police officers are failing to do their jobs or are acting in a way that's inappropriate. And some of the correspondence that we've received, I think, has been tremendously disheartening to our police department because it throws them into the mix with police departments that are not committed to community policing, that are not committed to ensuring that our citizens are treated equally. I think that when we're starting from a position where our police department feels as if it's under attack, but has not done anything to deserve that kind of criticism, that we place these officers in a very delicate position. I think it's concerning to them that they would be forced to be accountable to folks who do not have policing experience. As we are familiar with police officers and police departments, they are a brother and sisterhood. They take care of one another. They are working under extremely challenging conditions, and they are seeing and participating in events that are tremendously traumatic. I think they're concerned that they'll be held to a standard that's impossible, and I think they're concerned that they'll be held to, that their jobs will become impossible. And I am sensitive to those concerns, and I too want to make sure that when we go to them with our concerns or our requests or suggestions, that we do that with every bit of generosity that we can muster, to ensure that they understand that what we are looking for is an assurance that we are supporting them in the right way, and that they are getting what they need to provide the best and the safest possible policing, and that our goal is also to protect and serve them. When we see an officer engaged in an act of violence towards a member of their community, there are really two things that we can pull from our observation. Either that officer has made a terrible mistake that will haunt them for the rest of their lives, possibly destroy their career, and ruin their community standing, or the officer was justified, or the officer believed that they were justified. We want to make sure that no officer ever goes into a situation where they feel unprepared, untrained, or unable to respond in the best possible way that supports our community. And we do that in part because we want to make sure that we are there for them.
I must say, in reading over the draft of the ordinance establishing a Citizens Police Review Board, it's a very comprehensive proposal, 16 pages long to be exact. Who wrote this proposal, and where did you get all of this information to include in this proposal? Did you research other Citizens Police Review Boards?
Yes, and just to be completely transparent, the current draft that we're working through is a draft, I believe, from Newark, New Jersey, or one of the other long list of documents about Citizens Review Boards that we looked at from the very beginning. We are not starting a Citizens Review Board from scratch. This is an idea that has been proposed in many different areas throughout the country, and it's usually proposed or created in response to a terrible event. And so we've done the best we can to take a look at the many options that appear to be available, to choose a document that we could work with. And we are going line by line by line to review the document to see whether or not changes are needed to specifically address our community's concerns and to provide the support that we believe we need to provide to our department and to our community. So it's really important, from the get-go to understand that is a draft document. It's a living, breathing document that's under intense scrutiny, and it has not been finalized.
In reviewing this detailed ordinance, the city is obviously trying to be as transparent as possible when it comes to gaining community trust in the city's police department. As Deputy Mayor, how do you build trust between police and our community, especially when a reported 2/3 of Black Americans don't trust the police to treat them equally?
Well, I've been asked the question several times now, why now? Why try to create a civilian review board when the MPD is functioning admirably, when we have no complaints that indicate folks are being treated unfairly? Why now? And I think it's critical to our work as policymakers to respond to issues that appear to be external to us in this moment, but which are rapidly encroaching on us from a state and national level. I think it's impossible to deny that residents of Morgantown who are Black are concerned about policing generally, and they interact differently with the police than persons who do not have their same concerns. It is critical, I believe, for us to take this action now, when we're not operating under a cloud and when we're not operating under the grief and trauma of a horrible event. We are trying to respond to what is obviously a painful and traumatic experience that's existed for decades and decades and centuries in our country. One thing that I also want to point out is that in Morgantown, sometimes life can seem so idyllic and things can appear to be fine, but there's a lot of undercurrents there. You know, Morgantown was a segregated city. African Americans lived in areas where they were allowed to buy property. There are people who are alive today who remember not being allowed to buy food on High Street. Our city is just like most cities in our country. We have a racist history. We have a racist past. We need to ensure that we do not have a racist present and a racist future. Our citizens are responding to white supremacists who are leaving material, newspapers, and other propaganda in their front lawns. In the past couple of years, I served with a city councilor who had a biracial family, and when that family found white supremacist stuff in their yard, they were profoundly traumatized. When families who are Black or biracial or in another minority group that fears interacting with the police, when they see things happening at a state level or at a national level that are obviously driven by animus or are not stopped by concern for the public and for them specifically, it's traumatizing. We have to take action to respond to these things. We cannot wait for something terrible to happen to our community. Our community deserves better, and we need to respond in a way that's going to ensure that every citizen knows that if you are Black in our community, that we do not support or endorse the actions of any person that would ever harm you based on racial bias or an intent to minimize your right to live in our society in a free and happy way with the rights of every other citizen.
What is the timeline or next steps to fully develop this ordinance and recruit interested community members to apply for a spot on the Citizens Police Review Board?
I have been urging sloth. I guess maybe sloth is not the right word, but deliberation. It's a bit frustrating to other members of the group because we will make a lot of progress one day and then things will go very slowly the next. I feel like our schedule, which is weekly meetings, and our transparency, which is to invite every member of the public who's interested in contributing and allow everyone who needs to speak, that those things are going to take time. But this is not an area where we want to rush. This is not an area where we want to push in a way that's going to harm our relationship with the public or the police department. We have to take our time and do this in the right way. And I think that's the only way we can build trust, again, both between the committee itself and the police department and the committee itself and the community, and between the people that the police department serves and the police department.
Deputy Mayor Fetty, thank you so much for coming to our TV studio today to discuss police reform in our community. If our viewers would like more information on the Citizens Police Review Board, is there a website they can go to?
Yes, you can go to the City of Morgantown's website and you can look for agenda items related to the Committee on Community Policing, and there you'll find the time, date, and how you can participate. And of course, all of our meetings are by Zoom or WebEx, so you can participate from your own home.
Well, that wraps up this edition of Morgantown Today. I'd like to once again thank our guest, Deputy Mayor, Morgantown City Council Member, and Special Committee Co-Chair, Rachel Fetty. I'm Elena Degenhart.
And I'm Claire O'Neill. This show is made possible through a partnership between the City of Morgantown and the WVU Reed College of Media. It's taped at the WVU Waterfront TV studio. Thanks for joining us here on Morgantown Today.